Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are so happy that you've joined us. We have a very important presentation tonight that I think you are all going to be captivated by. But I do see a couple of new faces in the group, so I want to give you a quick background about Women Forward. And we actually started in 2020. We were a coalition of all the different campaigns, and we operated under the umbrella of Women for Biden. We started out with two women. By the time the election rolled around, we had 750,000 women, and we were the largest phone banking operation in the Biden campaign. We kind of all thought we'd go back to doing whatever we had previously been doing. And then January 6th happened. And we all looked at each other and said, we got to keep doing this. So we chugged along. When Kamala jumped into the race, we doubled to 1.5 million women. And we, once again, were disappointed in 2024, and we've kept up the fight. So we are grassroots. We have no budget, no funding, just a group of amazing women from across the country that are all very dedicated to our democracy and fighting for it. I was thinking about this session today, and I think this is probably the most important speaker we'll be hearing from in advance of the midterms. Democracy operates on trust. And right now, in states across the country, the machinery of democracy is under attack. We know that voter rolls are being purged, polling places are being moved or eliminated. There is huge confusion, which I'm hoping we might be able to clear up some tonight around voting by mail. And disinformation is being spread at a pace that trust can't keep, or accuracy can't keep up with. These midterms aren't just another election. They are a check on power that has run amok. And I think that's something that we have to be communicating to all of our groups consistently. But elections don't protect themselves. People do. And attorneys general are at the front of that fight. So tonight, we need to understand facts and where things stand. But we need to be doers going forward. We need people to help register people to vote. We need people to help get people out to vote, to work the polls, to do ballot curing after people have voted. One of my favorite sayings is that democracy is not a spectator sport. And it's built by people like all of you who refuse to just sit on the sidelines. So let's get into tonight's program. We've got so much to cover, and I'm going to turn things over to Rosa, our fearless Women Forward leader from Oregon, who will introduce tonight's speaker. Thanks, Rosa.
Thank you, Jen. Hello, everybody. I must say, especially today, that it is such an awesome privilege to introduce Attorney General Dan Rayfield to Women Forward and to all of our national listeners. Dan was sworn in as Oregon's 18th AG on the last day of December 2024, following two very successful terms by Ellen Rosenblum, Oregon's only female attorney general in its history. I thought it was important to mention Ellen because I've had the opportunity to watch these two great leaders work together on behalf of Oregon and all Americans. Since coming into office, Dan has focused on economic justice, consumer protection, public safety, protecting seniors, working families, improving education, and zealously upholding the rule of law. And tonight, above all times, we know that that is something that is not happening at the federal level. Prior to his service as Attorney General, Dan spent a decade in the Oregon legislature and was elected Speaker of the House in 2022. His tenure as Speaker was marked by many achievements, in economic health, healthcare, education, and housing. But I want to share with this group that under his leadership and dedication, Oregon enacted the nation's strongest abortion protections. And I have to share this. On the night of Oregon's March 2024 midterms, when Dan won his primary race as Democratic Attorney General candidate elect for the November ballot, at that time, I was chair of Oregon's Democratic Party, so I sent him a congratulatory note, as I did all primary winners, at the wee hour of 1 o'clock a.m. He's smiling already. However, I congratulated him as Attorney General Rayfield. When I realized the next morning what I had written, after sleeping a couple of hours, the fact that I forgot to say candidate-elect Attorney General, I then sent another note to say candidate-elect, to which he graciously replied, I understood what you meant. Get some rest. At any rate, I didn't have to send another email 8 months later when he won his race to become Oregon's Attorney General in November. But I tell you this to tell you something about how good-natured he is. He is a wonderful person, working across the nation with all state AGs and aggressively defending, protecting the nation's children, seniors, and all families. A.G. Rayfield is our neighbor and he is our friend. Dan, welcome to Women Forward. It's now my pleasure to turn the program over to moderator extraordinaire, Linda Douglas, so that we can get down to a great discussion. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Rosa, and welcome, Mr. Attorney General. How do you, what is your salutary title? Can I just, how about Mr.?
Yeah, I just go by Dan.
Oh,
If you ask my 15-year-old what he calls me, like that's probably not appropriate for this Zoom. My wife calls me Danny, my sister calls me Danny, and so does my mom. So, you name it. If it's a serious conversation, you call me Daniel. Um, you know, but I'll say Rosa's amazing, and I'll do anything that Rosa says. So it was an easy decision to be here. She truly her contribution to Oregon and democratic politics, and just being an amazing human being is something that doesn't get talked about enough.
well, we certainly appreciate her efforts and the efforts of all of our women and her effort to get you to talk to us because we have a lot of questions. As you just heard Jill say, this really is arguably one of our most important sessions as a group of activist volunteers. And we are very active and we like to volunteer. And we are going to go places in this election season, and we're going to be calling people, and we're going to be having events and doing phone banking and all of the things that you need to do in an urgent election like this, if we have an election. And of course, I mean, there actually are serious professional people who say we may not even have an election. So before we get to that very extreme possibility, we should talk to you about the news that's happening right now that you're right in the middle of. And
Mhm.
that is these court decisions that are essentially saying that that the post office, which has a list generated by the Department of Homeland Security, can decide who gets to vote by mail and who doesn't. So can you explain what that means? I mean, a lot of our participants here in Women Forward certainly vote by mail. What does this mean? What do these court decisions mean? And what's likely to happen? And in addition to your legal efforts, what can we do about it?
Yeah, and if I could try to make it more complicated, I would really have to work at it. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I want to do is just back up and maybe talk about some foundational things before we jump into that specific endeavor, and that the one specific case that's dominating all the headlines right now. If you watch the current president and you're thinking about power, and that's what I would argue that the last 2 years have been setting up a campaign of how do I retain power, and majority Party presidents know that in midterms you often suffer losses. And if they want to continue to move their agenda, which has often been unlawful and unconstitutional, you need to retain some power somehow anyway. And they know once Congress is gone, a lot of the things they're doing right now, they're going to lose an incredible amount of leverage in what they're doing. So this is kind of the premise. What you've started to see, and the way I like to think about it, is you frame the problem in two different ways. Okay, there is if you are trying to maintain power, what you want to do is you want to get to election day, have the elections happen, and you want to have some, what I would say, feeling that it was a legitimate election, right? So you're going to try and change the game before you get to election day. Okay, and the way that we've seen this play out during the last 2 years, and this leads up to the lawsuit, think about redistricting. It's not really redistricting, so excuse me, gerrymandering that was going on. They said, hey, we don't like the way the maps are. So we're going to change the rules to the game leading up to the election. So you start going down this redistricting thread in all of these conservative states, gerrymandering, which causes Democrat states to then, in rebuttal, do the same thing. At the same time, you are lessening for all of us, Democrats and Republicans, we're lessening our credibility in the sanctity and fairness of our elections, right? And so this is going on. At the same time, what you're seeing is the Trump administration asking for voter rolls. They're doing a lot of these things, and we're fighting all of these things in the court, and we're winning. But at the same time, what it's really starting to do is create a narrative for President and his folks to say, hey, if Democrats didn't have anything to hide, why wouldn't they turn over the lists? Right. So you're creating this interesting narrative along the way, and then they start attacking other things. And so the most recent one was back in March, and that's the current case that is really gathering a lot of the headlines, which is we want to attack vote by mail. And I'm cherry picking only a handful of the many things they've been doing. Vote by mail, they bring in an executive order in March, I believe it was, that effectively said, hey, all of us, where we see a post office, where we put a letter in the mail, we've always taken it for granted our entire lives that you put the letter in, you've got the postage that is on there, it will be delivered no matter what. That is the brand of the post office. No rain, sleet, nor snow, right? That gets delivered. And saying, no, the post office is now going to be a gatekeeper between you and your access to the ballot. And the way that they had set it up was the first executive order told the post office create rules. Okay, so start the process of creating rules about how you're going to get a list of voters from the state. You're going to create your own list of voters. And then the post office, you're then going to choose who to send those ballots to or who to deliver those ballots to, right? Very unique, strange role that the post office would be put into place. So in March, we as state attorneys general, we had a decision to make, and it's a strategic legal decision. And I apologize, this is kind of in the weeds and might be a little bit wonky, but I think hopefully it'll be interesting and lend some context of what's going right now. The strategic decision is, do we be really aggressive, get a case in front of a judge right now and stop this thing? Or do we pause and wait until the post office's proposed rule and then final rule about how they're going to make the list, check the lists, and do that process becomes finalized? We chose we're going to be aggressive because we wanted to stop this, get it in front of a judge, educate a judge, and start the process of moving this thing forward. And that's what we did. And we were successful at the lower courts. Some folks would ask, why were you successful? And I think this is an important question, and it's super simple. The Constitution is incredibly clear. Time, place, manner of elections are left to the states when Congress is silent. The way you can internalize that is thinking about how all of our states have different primary dates, right? Mm-hmm. So our primary dates vary between the states. Congress is silent. They don't have to be, but they are. So we as states get to make those decisions. That's why some states do vote by mail. Some states don't. Some have a hybrid, right? We're able to figure out what works best for our population as we go through that. So now in this situation, that is why the president has no authority over our elections, right? Also, you wouldn't want the most powerful person in our country to be able to control our elections. That is not what a democracy is about. So he has this executive order doing it creatively. He's instructing the post office to effectively regulate time, place, and matter, right? When you're thinking about it. That's why we're successful initially. Now, the federal government has been not shy about appealing some of these cases. And so what they did is they started appealing up. Most of the wins that the President Trump has gotten in the courts are on procedural issues. And that's exactly what this is. And so you remember when I said we made a strategic decision to file fast. That's effectively what the government said. You filed too soon. And we want to appeal that to the Supreme Court that you filed too soon. And the Supreme Court said, yes, you filed too soon. They said you need to file when the rules become final, right? And so they gave us what I would say is the blueprint, which has been a traditional blueprint of when your case is, and you'll hear lawyers say when your case is ripe, when you'll have standing to go ahead and bring your case. And generally, that's when the harm has occurred, then you can bring your case. And I apologize for getting so into the weeds. That happens. There is already an injunctive order, and because there were multiple cases being filed, that injunction on the other case that was there got removed as well because that case would be filed too soon, with the same rationale as the Supreme Court, which is exactly why the state AGs filed a new case yesterday morning back east with the same judge, exact same case. Nothing has changed. And we'll be back in front of a judge here pretty shortly. So as you're thinking about, is that executive order going to go in place? Is that ruling going to go in place? Temporary right now, there's absolutely no injunction in place. However, we're going to likely have an injunction very soon because it's the exact same case in front of the judge who's frankly ruled already and on the merits of that issue. So I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it was, I mean, we're not all lawyers, but I think we all certainly understood what you're saying. What the bottom line of what you're saying is it's not as bad potentially as it seems. Because, what you see in the headlines is, all of a sudden the post office is going to decide, who gets to vote. But what are the consequences for us citizens if, in fact, this very worrisome Supreme Court finds merit in the post office scheme? I mean, what could happen here? I mean, what we're trying to kind of game out scenarios where we should be mobilizing, where we should be putting on political pressure, and we want to ask you questions about that. But what are the potential consequences if this goes against what appears to be, right and legal?
Yeah, and I think the worry and the fear is real. I mean, it's one of the outreach that we get in our office all the time. We're convening electoral groups here in the state of Oregon. I think for everybody first to realize is that you have Democratic attorneys general. We have been meeting regularly. We're having another meeting in 2 weeks, and we game plan all of the scenarios out. We have elections professionals that come in, and we are ready. We've already researched a lot of the issues. The one nice thing about the Trump administration is they're not shy about talking about what they want to do. And when you aren't shy about talking about what you want to do, that really gives us an opportunity to prepare so we can be in the court the next day, sometimes in the exact same day. Just a little bit of let's talk about worst case scenario. But before we get there, I really do not believe we are going to get to a worst case scenario on the vote by mail issue, especially given the time frame that we have to the election, the 2 month period. It would be historic to be able to elevate something to the Supreme Court. And then on the eve of when elections, and frankly, in the middle of elections as they're taking place, the Supreme Court to step in and do something would be wildly radical. And frankly, even though we don't like some of the decisions that come out of the Supreme Court, it would still be at odds with their historic pattern and practice of this current court. So know that. Also, every single electoral ruling that we've had in all levels of courts from Republican and Democratic judges have been consistent, and we've been successful in every single one of them. So know that is your baseline. Know that you have a group of people, even though we do believe and we have some optimism on this specific executive order, we do also and are prepared for these potential eventualities that may come down the road. And a lot of that is going to be collaboration between your county clerks. That's going to be because that is really where things are being done. It's about education. It's going to be done in states in a worst case scenario. And then there's going to be obviously the court filings that would continue to go forward in making sure that these elections are being upheld. One of the things that would go on is in a worst case scenario, let's say that this plan went forward. what they're going to do is they're going to take your state lists, and this is where the fear comes in. Your state list of registered voters is more close in time to real voters who are actually exercising their right. And so we all have different deadlines for when it takes to register a vote. So our local lists at your county level, at your state level, are just more accurate. So you're going to submit those to the post office. In theory, the post office is going to have their own list, and then they will cross-check it, and then they will start listing who should get a ballot, who won't get a ballot, right? And so it is going to be a subset of the folks in there. All of that is going to have to be public, and there are processes in place that, at least internally, that we're talking about to be ready for that moment, even though we really don't think that moment is going to occur. And a lot of this is going to be education. So if we are sitting there and this should come, it's going to take education from all of us. And it's just like if some of us get our information on the news, some of us, watch YouTube, some of us don't do either, right? And we still have papers. And so it's going to take all of us in these actions to say, did I get my ballot? Right? Was I one of those individuals that didn't receive my ballot? To be on high alert. Under certain circumstances, we're probably would be recommending to just deliver it, take it to the ballot drop box if you're a state that does vote by mail, right? Don't waste it on the postage. Save your postage. Just hop right down to your ballot box, right? So that's going to be the education and outreach that eventually could come down the road, should this occur. The hope is obviously that doesn't, and
Well, we certainly hope that doesn't occur, but since you are meeting with all the attorneys general around the country, who are concerned about, what could happen, because I mean, this is an extremist president, certainly. What scenarios are possible? What should we be aware could happen? I mean, when people say we won't have elections, that's the example of declaring a national emergency and saying we're not going to have any elections. But tell us, if you can, what, two or three scenarios, or five or six you're preparing for.
I will. So even in a worst case scenario, the president's setting up a narrative and trying to declare that you can't have elections. Those are things that we think about and are prepared for. We think the likelihood of that is incredibly low, but it's a possibility, right? So you get prepared and you do your research behind these things. I think or moving the date of an election. Right. So and that's how you might be able to try and whittle some of these things in. You get worried about intimidation, right? So again, get back to kind of what I was saying at the beginning. The first thing is you want to have an election that looks like it was done fair, right? But you've changed the game to maintain power. What do? You change vote by mail. You attack that. You redraw the lines. You then create intimidation. Lack of information. You decrease things that decrease access. You try and change registration rules. All of those things are things that you would do before an election to where it kind of looks like the election's okay, but you've been manipulating it behind the scenes, right? And so those are the type of things you prepare for and up to and leading to election day. Then there's the things on election day and post that go on after that. So now you've lost, right? What is the narrative and what are the tools that they're then going to employ to then challenge the election results? And so those are the set of things that we're prepared for on the back end as well. So that's why I kind of really like to say leading up to and then after the elections, how we think about protecting the integrity of the elections.
So you have kind of it's kind of opposing roles. On the one hand, you don't want people to panic, and you're trying to be reassuring. But on the other hand, it would seem to me that we really have to get mobilized as the public, in order to create some kind of political pressure on the state officials who really are the ones who should be fighting back the hardest. And I guess that all kind of brings me to, as you plan out your scenarios, is one of them trying to figure out what the most effective role of the public, of people like us, could be to try to build political pressure in addition to legal strategies.
Well, the one thing that I would say is I think we always need to have political pressure. We should not take an election off. We should not take a cycle off. And we need to have that consistent political pressure pushing us towards what we want our country to look like, a decade from now, 2 decades from now. Incredibly important. This election, I think, is incredibly important. And I know we say that all the time. And then we say that we say it all the time. But we say we really mean it this time. But I think all of us can feel the gravity of this coming election. And what does that mean? And I think that is a good thing. And it will certainly cause a lot of us to be active. The things that I really want folks to encourage, and I think you all talk about these things, and there's some, I think down the road, we'll talk about how this can be done, is getting out and volunteering at your county clerks, right? Frankly, being in the room. One of the things that is amazing here in Oregon is anyone that watches our electoral process sees it with their eyes, realizes the integrity of that process. And the more people, I believe this firmly, the more people that I can get in a county clerk's office watching, verifying elections, the better. And honestly, I'm a Democrat. I love it when Republicans go do this. In fact, I think it is a dangerous precedent. I was in Eastern Oregon earlier this week, and only Democrats were volunteering to be in the county clerk's office. That is a horrible thing. We need Republicans in that room with us because we believe in our process. And that starts to lend credibility as we build up trust back in our electoral systems. Because right now it is an absolute all-time low. We're having Democrats right now question the validity of the election 2 years ago, right? I mean, we're really, all of us, the stress levels have hit. So getting and volunteering on the state side of things in election offices, right, to be there, making sure things are going right, in which in almost all cases they are, but then also encouraging our friends that are on the other side of the aisle, saying, hey, come with us. Be a part of this process with us, because we're not afraid of how we're counting ballots in America. We're afraid of an administration that doesn't want to count ballots, right? Or frankly, doesn't want you to return your ballot. That's super important. I think it's having open and honest conversations with people that we don't necessarily agree with, doing it politely and respectfully. I always say that my father is a Republican. My mother's a Green Party. Okay. In my primary that Rosa mentioned, neither of them voted for me in my primary, right? They couldn't. So that's where we go. But you know what? If I ask both of them, what do you want out of your elections? If they're not a politician in this world, they're all going to say we want fair, accurate elections because we want who is the majority to govern us, right? That's the whole purpose. And so that's why I'm not afraid of Republicans in my community. I'm not afraid to show them how we do things because it really is helpful. But most of us are busy in our day to day, right? We're trying to figure out what are we going to eat tonight? Gosh, I mean, I don't know what we're eating in our house tonight. But that's the real struggle we have to then dedicate the time to then go do these other incredibly important actions is something that is extracurricular. It can be stressful and add something on. And if we have the luxury to do it, we need to do it. And I think it was you yourself said that democracy is you have to work at it, right? This is something I would say democracy isn't something you inherit and you're like, yay. We have to continually work at it every single generation.
So one of the, I mean, this is democracy and its politics. And, we've all been sort of stunned by how utterly compliant the Republicans in Congress have been with everything that Trump has done that is outside the bounds of the Constitution. But on the other hand, it turned out that all they cared about was their own reelection prospects. And the MAGA base was more important to them than other voters in their states. Here, it would seem like the political stakes would be highest in terms of voters for their governors, for their secretaries of state, for the state officials, for their attorneys general, who they elect. Why do we sort of fear and even assume that Trump might get his way? I mean, again, it's a different body of Republicans who are exposed to political pressure here. Why would they give in? Why would they give away state sovereignty?
It is a question of a lifetime, and I think it is fear. You have a leader and I hate to use the word term leader, but it's the leader of the Republican Party who is choosing to lead his party through fear. He created a monstrous PAC with tons of dollars, and anybody who steps out of line, he squashes them like a bug, or he threatens to, right? And he has just enough pull to where that threat has some validity for those people who, frankly, only care about their political careers. right? Which also says something about the state we are with our political officials, right? And that's Democrat and Republican. There are some people who are unwilling to make tough decisions because being a politician is all they are. The best thing about being an attorney general, and you all, here's a little sneak peek here. I have a law degree. So if this gig doesn't work out, I just go back and practice law. You can't say that about a lot of different politicians, right? And I think that dynamic really becomes challenging in a Republican Party that is just led by fear, which is, it's an incredibly sad state. I think it brings up real valid questions about how we elect people in primaries. As the United States or in each individual state, I'm not sure that my personal feeling is we don't have that right. I think it is a small subset of parties that sometimes can control, which then leads to this dynamic right now. If some, and I was Speaker of the House, and I'll tell you, Republicans would come in and say, well, I can't vote for that because I'll get primaried. Yeah, but I really support it. It's like, and they don't have the backbone to stand up. Now, in fairness, many Democrats don't as well at times too. At the beginning of this Trump administration, there were not enough Democrats willing to stand up to this president, and that was incredibly frustrating at times. So I think it's important to recognize the moment, but then it's also important, I think, for all of us to think about the root cause of why these things exist and how do we change the systems so this doesn't continue to perpetuate. Because if we don't change the rules to the game, it is. And we haven't even talked about money in politics, right? Trump is able to do these things because he's able to amass these billions of dollars and bring this money into our elections. And also, then on top of that, talk about how a lot of these policy decisions are controlled by large, wealth groups or individuals that control elections, would then ultimately control the policies, which is not on behalf of all of us. I apologize. I think structural reform is critical for our democracy moving forward, and they're tough conversations, though.
By the way, I want to remind our audience, because I think I did not do this at the beginning, that if you have questions for the Attorney General, please put them in the chat. This is a webinar, so you won't be hearing directly from people asking questions, but we have somebody who's assembling them all, and I'm taking some of them have started to come in actually, but I just want to remind everybody you will get a chance. A few questions will be asked at the end of our conversation. One of the things that we are trying to be specific about, and I understand Oregon is unique in that it's a male-only state,
Yeah.
but there are a lot of different kinds of states, as you say, hybrids and emphasis on same-day voting and so forth. One of the things you've mentioned that is very interesting is going down to watch the counting at the clerk's office. That's a suggestion that I think we want to just keep circulating with the women in our group. What about, and of course, working as poll workers, we've all been, urged to do that if that works for your organization or where you live, your geography. But what about going in person, to in-person voting, to be present in the face of harassment, or even to escort frightened voters into the polling place? Are those things that would be helpful, or are they likely to lead to more trouble?
Everybody should, in this world, the top mind should be is like personal safety. So always keep that in mind for anything you're doing. I think each individual, that say if we're trying to help somebody who may not want to go to the polling place, right? We want to make sure that we're not influencing people, outside of where their comfort, right? So I think there's always a risk if you're pressuring somebody or things like that. So just people should use their common sense in that. Absolutely, there's going to be some folks that are going to feel more comfortable going as a buddy, right? And going along together, unquestionably. I love to think that I'm independent, but if I'd rather go to a movie with somebody than go by myself. And even though we're quiet, we're not talking, it's still nicer to share that with somebody. I think the same thing was with every activity. And this is one most certainly, as you're having conversations, it's incredibly important that we're supporting each other. Being at the polling places is incredibly important. All of those things. The thing that got me most excited when you first started talking, I didn't even reference it, where you were saying you had like 1.5 million people on the phones dialing the phone. That is an incredible amount of power that you have in this group. That is incredible amount of democracy, live action in process. That's rare, but it is yeah, harnessing that is incredible, and I mean that's what makes our country great.
So, in terms of the kinds of things that could be faced by those of us who want to go in person or help, do you think is the likelihood that ICE is going to flood Latino polling places? For example, Texas. I mean, that would be certainly, I would imagine, a big concern for Talarico in Texas is if ICE goes and intimidates Latino voters so that they're afraid, even if they are legal, that it's going to be too hard that they're prove, to prove that they're legal, and the stakes are huge in their lives. They could get dragged off to, El Salvador or, Liberia or whatever. What is the likelihood of that? And won't that have an impact? And what can you do, you attorneys general, to prevent that from happening?
First and foremost, this is something, one of the many things that we've talked about that falls into that first camp of what do you do to, if you are the Trump administration trying to influence or squash the vote in any given state in any given region. And so that's something that's top of mind. They've talked about it. Those are things that we have actively looked in for and have plans kind of as we're monitoring what's going on. As you all are in different states and figuring out how you're going to engage, I think definitely talking with your county clerks locally is incredibly important. Thinking about your own safety in some of these situations. In Oregon, we had a lot of interactions with ICE and private citizens. And what I can tell you is that some of the folks that ICE and the roles that they have put them in, they have not been trained for. Some of them have no training at all. When you lack training and you put them in public engagement spots, that is not a healthy recipe. And we've seen that in many, many communities. So the number one thing that I always just think is personal safety is very important. I also think we're in America, and so, being using your voice appropriately is mandatory in times like these. It's not really a luxury that we have. And so doing that in a respectful way that really is able to facilitate the exercise of our rights to vote, but at the same time, you have to be very careful, is your organizing as well.
So, in terms of Oregon and people who have seen the headlines about what could happen to mail-in voting, are preparations being made just in case you have to throw together a live voting operation? I mean, is that something that is being considered in Oregon?
Listen, I was a horrible Boy Scout. I'll just say that. I never made it to Eagle Scout. But I do remember they always said, always be prepared. Now, when I was a kid, I didn't always follow that. I'd go out and I'd be cold in the wilderness. As an adult, as you're looking through these things, and especially with the Trump administration, always be prepared, I think is a wonderful model for how you approach this. You prepare for the worst all the time. And you have plans in place for all those things. And so we have numerous tables that we've convened at the Attorney General's office where we invited our Secretary of State to participate. We have panels where we have more election security issues. So think about ballot boxes that are set on fire, and we're having more of a criminal context. You've got the administrations and bringing people together, and then we have our group of attorneys general across this country. The beautiful thing right now is we have a pattern in history of working together seamlessly, and we have some of the best minds doing this stuff. I will tell you, the attorneys general, we are kind of the spearheading some of this stuff, but it's the smart people on the front lines on our offices that are really kind of these true heroes as public servants right now that deserve all of the credit. As politicians, attorneys general, we'll wave our hands, we'll take all the credit we can get, right? But what we forget is that there is an army of public servants that are working day and night to get that case filed as quickly as we did post the Supreme Court's decision. I can't tell you how much work that took in all of our offices, but these are individuals dedicated that will never be celebrated, kind of upholding this rule of law.
So now I am gonna switch to some questions from the audience because we are really getting a lot of questions. And one of them is, in terms of the gerrymandering that you were referring to earlier, when you were kind of talking about all the
Mhm.
many ways that they're trying to skew their chances in the election, how do you think that's going to play out? I mean, what is your kind of put on your politician's hat now,
Yeah.
a little bit more than your attorney general's hat? I mean, how do you think that's going to play out for the elections?
And everybody's prognosticating, right, about like how does that impact numbers? That's one question. What does that happen to the baseline numbers, positive, negative to the balance? And I think most pundits will say that the totality, when you count the wins and losses in both red and blue states as they've reacted, that the Republicans did take a little bit of an advantage in the way that those seats were constructed. And so there's that. But you also have the wind at your backs in a midterm. When you're seeing right now the generic Democratic ballot is to levels that you saw in 2018, right? So pretty high. You can't take anything for granted. But I think the frustration of this moment is incredible. That you're saying, I mean, like I'm frustrated, so there is, I mean, which I think we all are. So I think that those are healthy signs, I think, as we're looking at how this goes. So you have a lot of prognosticators in that. I do worry long term, because I think it was like, what's the result in the short term? But what's the result in the long term in this country, which is such a bigger issue when you have politicians of both parties that are just willing to gerrymander back and forth. And it really takes away, I think, the integrity and belief that we have in our elections, that these elections are really a farce. And we as Democrats and Republicans all start feeling the same way. And that really tugs at, I think, one of the strongest core tenets of our democracy and our trust in this democracy, that the people who represent us really are people who that were elected to represent us, right? As opposed to some electoral college game. Because if you really play this out and we all just start gerrymandering, Oregon would have 5 Democrats, right? And we'd have a goofy looking map. All the blue states would just have blue, uh, you know, uh, members of Congress, and all the red states would have that, and the Senate would be kind of an interesting, difference. And so that is where you could wind up, where you just wind up in an electoral college type situation with your members of Congress, which is obviously is what it wasn't intended. My hope is that you have elect members to Congress and in the Senate that can stop looking backwards to 2020 and look forward and focus on the common values that we share and try and address some significant reforms in Congress. Whether that they are capable of that, I think is part of the frustration all of us are feeling right now.
One of our, and we are from all over the United States, our group is, one of the questions we've gotten here is, should there be interference with the with voting by mail? I mean, should the worst case scenario happen in rural areas? Would it be possible, or should we plan for, people to pick up ballots way out in rural areas and deliver them? Or is that just going to open the doors for more accusations of fraud?
And so in Oregon, that is a technique that has been used, and it has always been attacked. And what they will do is they will call it ballot harvesting. And of course, then there's going to be negative use of it. And now, practically speaking, what I would say, in terms of getting the vote out, I've knocked on, countless doors, more than 20,000 doors in my lifetime in politics. And every get out the vote, you always offer. And maybe a handful of times has someone say, yeah, that'd be great if you could take it in. We have sign-in sheets. We do all these things. There's a risk that if you lose that ballot, if it doesn't get delivered, so know that there's a little bit of concerns on that side. There's concerns of manipulation on a ballot, right? All of those things are present. What I would say is, especially in rural areas, the commuting time to get the ballot and doing all the things may not be the highest and best use of, say, 2 hours of your time, right? If you could get on the phone and talk to 4 people who are going to actually get their ballots filled out and delivered it versus driving to someone's home and turning it in, it really becomes a resource question of what's the best way to turn out the vote to get people to exercise their ballot. But I think those are viable strategies that many people have used.
So one of the issues you're going to be among the many issues you might face is outright tampering or fraud from malign forces. So they figure out how to stuff a ballot box, or they figure out, as you said, to catch one on fire. What in all of the planning that the attorneys general are doing together, what are you all agreeing is necessary for security around the voting?
Yeah, and so those are active conversations that go on state to state, and they're very different. And so, and what I can tell you is in Oregon, right, we have a very diverse landscape. From we have our rural areas, we have our metropolitan areas, we have our coastal areas, which are very different than some of, say, Eastern Oregon or Southern Oregon. And then we have our county clerks. And county clerks are really front and center in some of these conversations. What we do is we put together a team, and we have multiple teams that are kind of that will look at security and implementing security. We have experience with these things as well. So just as in past elections, we have had ballot boxes that have been hit by cars negligently, right? Not necessarily intentionally. We've had ballot boxes that have been set on fire. So we have experiences with these activities and dealing with them. So we feel fairly, what I would say, confident that the current systems in place are built to withstand some of those stresses. Now, there's always going to be things that you don't anticipate, right? And I think that's why you have leading up to election day, especially in Oregon, we have this team on standby and that are regularly communicating with each other. And interestingly enough, in some of those teams, it involves the post office, right? And interestingly enough, it involves the U.S. Attorney's Office, depending on the lane that we're operating within. Some of them, obviously, the U.S. Attorney's Office or others, aren't as interested in participating, as you can imagine.
So one of the things we do is send around messaging that we have in house parties, that we have on phone calls, uniform advice or messaging or reassurance or whatever is needed to be communicated to our voters out there. What would you say is the most important thing that we should be as the election day nears or as voting begins? What's the most important thing that we should be saying to the people that we talk about in our circles, or I mean, the people we talk to in our circles?
We get back to the most simple things. And it's the basics. Your first and foremost priority is to vote. Right? That's the number one thing. If you have the luxury in life to have more time available to you, it's getting out and using that time. The most valuable asset in a democracy is time and people and power, right? And together with the time and a bunch of people, that's where the power comes from. How people choose to volunteer is something that is a personal preference. It can be to a candidate that's going to change. A swing candidate is where I would prioritize, that is going to change the makeup of maybe your state legislature. It could be your county commission. It could be your school board if that election is up. It could be in Congress, or it could be in the Senate. I think that is where the traditional political power moves to. But then I think we talked about it as well. It's on election day at the polling places with your county clerk. It's before that. It's working with other people. So if you have the flexibility in your time to do that, that's absolutely needed. In a world in which, and the third thing we always say is in a world in which that you continue to see money play an outsized role, which basically deafens the voices of most Americans. When you have billionaires putting their money, and now we have a trillionaire in this world. At the same time, we have a minimum wage of 15. Figure that out for me. Sorry, I always editorialize here and there, so you got to bear with me, Linda. But this is the world we're living in, and to think that our voices are as loud as Elon Musk is an absolute joke. Because they can buy elections and buy money. So collectively, though, this is the thing. We have power in numbers. We always have and always will. And that is if you have the flexibility to volunteer and you can donate to whatever that cause that you believe in, if research is going to make a difference, then you do that. And you win elections by doing all of those things, right? And those are the folks that really kind of bring trust back in our systems.
Final question here. So in your conversations with state attorneys general, are there any Republican attorneys general involved? Aren't they worried if they are running for reelection themselves or if their governor is running for reelection, that suppressing the vote is going to interfere with their own reelection prospects? Or are they just sitting there silently letting the Democrats deal with all this?
It's quiet, right? It goes back to fear of your own political career. And it is a reality where a lot of Republicans are able to rely upon the lawsuits that the Democratic attorneys general are filing. So when we filed the lawsuit to protect the Victim of Crime Act dollars coming into all the states, you know what? Republican states benefited from the Democrats' work. They didn't need to sign up and say anything. They could take the easy way out and try and protect their own careers. So that goes on. That's real. And so I don't believe you're going to see that. Now, with that said, right, and that's incredibly depressing and like disheartening in America. But with that said, I have to have positivity and like there has to be a purpose and a light that we're moving towards, to keep doing this type of work. And what are we fighting for in this process? And there's a couple of things for me. I always go back. Mike Pence and certified the election, okay, in 2020. That's a positive thing to sit there and always recognize some of the positive as well. One of the fun things is when the president was trying to use the FCC to really squelch, speech in America. Do you know who stood up? Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, of all
Right.
people, said, "Hey, I think we're going a little too far." Right. So I'll take my positive where I can get it, right? And then the other thing, and the Supreme Court is incredibly frustrating. There are so many things that I disagree that have come out of there. However, they have, on multiple occasions, on big, big issues, stood up to the president. Birthright citizenship. They said the Constitution is clear. Now, don't get me wrong. I was telling everybody on calls like this, like, "Hey, I'm confident. I'm confident." Deep down, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, they better do this. They better rule in our favor." So be very honest that I had a little bit of nervousness, but the law was so clear, right? And they stood together on that. Not together. There was a handful that screwed it up, but the majority agreed with it. Same thing with tariffs, right? That was Oregon's case. We argued that in the Supreme Court. And to see some of the most conservative jurists say, "President, you will not abuse your emergency powers," right? Now, all of that to say, we can't take anything for granted. We need to be ready. But I also want to say that I think there is reason for hope in America. I think that, through groups like yours and the volunteering and a lot of the other good work too.
So finally, we always like to ask our esteemed guests like you to give us a call to action, something, some urging us to do something, to take a step, something that'll make us think about this, as we move forward in the election season.
So here's the way I think about it. I'm very mathematical and I'm very numbers oriented, and I really believe in boy, just hearing how much or how many volunteers you have is just incredibly empowering. I think everybody should take stock first of what they did during the last election cycle, and then let's all say to ourselves, that wasn't good enough.
Mhm.
Right. And in this week, like all of us have different financial means. So this isn't about donating, right? But if you have the flexibility to get out and do, look at what you get out and did 2 years ago, and then put it on a piece of paper and then double it. And that means getting out in your election places, getting out, whatever brings you the value and satisfaction when you get home that evening, right? Knowing that your time made a difference. But honestly, targeting together in groups like this, where you call into one district or two districts, that's so powerful. Getting out at the voters, on election day. Before that, in our states, right, we are counting ballots for multiple weeks, so we need volunteers for multiple weeks. So know your process, know your systems, right? Be plugged in, and don't just talk to the people we like talking to. Be respectful, be kind to each other. I think try and recognize that we have more in common with each other than any politician really wants us to admit. And like I think it is slowly moving us back in a better direction over a 10 to 20 year period, because I do believe it's going to take a lot of time for this country to heal.
Well, thank you so much. That was extremely valuable advice that you've given us, and we feel a little bit better being in the capable hands of attorneys general like you who are fighting on the front lines. So thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to return it back to our fearless leader, Jill.
Thank you, Attorney General. Thank you, Linda. That was a very important session. Here are some things that we've got up on the slide, things that you can do, how you can sign up to be a poll worker, an observer. Please, if you don't subscribe to our Substack, subscribe because we give you action items every week. But I would say talk to your friends. This is a big recruiting effort as well. We need each one of you to go out and bring 5 friends along. Just like AG Rayfield said, he doesn't like to go to the movies alone. I'm sure you don't want to do some of this volunteering alone. So enlist your buddies, but it's going to take an army, and we can do this. We've got time. We know what they're going to do. So let's just kick it into gear and get it done. Finally, I will say these sessions take a village. And so I'd like to thank Jen and Joe and Rosa and Linda, and most of all, our guest for joining us tonight. But, you know, we're in countdown mode. We can do this. My dogs are freaking out in the background. Sorry. But let's figure out where we think we can contribute and get to it. So thank you. Have a good afternoon. Have a good evening, and we'll see you soon.